Freddie, thank you for joining us. You're the analyst for the Desert Vipers. A special season for them. The first time they've won, third time was the charm for them. Just your thoughts on how the season went so far. Rather, how the season went for them.
Well, yeah, it was obviously finishing with a trophy. It was a successful season, but it was, I think, probably just reward and well deserved for not only this season, but also the four seasons across the history of the ILT20, where the Vipers have been one of the best, if not the best team, I'd say, year on year. They've been fairly consistent, and there was only one year when we failed to make the playoffs, obviously twice finishing as runners up. So not only was it sort of the culmination of all of the work that we put in this year, but I think it felt like the reward for four seasons of work as well. So yeah, it was very special.
So you said one of the best teams. I think statistically, the Vipers actually have the highest the highest win rate across the four seasons. So I think first, maybe what do you think set the Vipers apart this season? And then if we could also just segue into in general, what makes them such a hard team to beat in the DP World ILT20?
Oh, well, there's a number of factors I think contributing this year. I mean, one thing in particular that stands out is like there's a lot of stability, particularly among the backroom staff. So the coaches, the science and medicine team, and then also just the guys behind the scenes at the back office as well. So from an organization perspective, there's a lot of stability there, and so every season when the coaches at least arrive, there's sort of clarity about what it is that they're looking to do. The way that the Vipers are looking to play their cricket remains fairly consistent. That's from the top, from Phil Oliver, the CEO, and Tom Moody, the director of cricket, obviously feeding into James Foster, the head coach. That trio has been consistent throughout all four seasons, and I think it breeds a lot of familiarity. And for the players, whilst there has been a little bit of change among the identity of the players, the sort of type of cricket, the brand of cricket that we've wanted to play has been fairly consistent. And so players come in and they drop into roles, and we generally like to give players a fairly long time in that role to become accustomed to it. And we back them to deliver rather than chopping and changing, which you do see sometimes in franchise cricket. You get quite reactive decisions. Rather than that, I think we have a lot of stability. So that's been a key thing, particularly this season. I felt like that was the case because we had a number of new players, but the way we wanted to play the cricket remained the same. And I think that's true for across the four seasons. Tom Moody, in particular, has a very clear philosophy about the way that he likes to structure his teams, and he's brought that to life brilliantly across the 4 years at the Vipers.
You said the Vipers brand of cricket. If how would you put that into words if you're able to? What kind of defines the Vipers brand of cricket?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say that there's a couple of key things. Firstly, I think there's an emphasis on a strong bowling attack. It's something that, as I said, Tom Moody has often had. His Sunrisers team, who won the IPL nearly 10 years ago now, was founded on a very strong bowling attack. And although we've seen T20 cricket change in the last decade or so, particularly in the IPL and sometimes in the PSL now, with scores getting a lot higher. In the ILT20, that hasn't quite happened. And I think that it's meant that there's sort of that old school style of T20 cricket still has a lot of value. So when I say old school, I mean that emphasis on a strong bowling attack and a batting order that, whilst still possessing plenty of power, is founded on quite a strong base. So it's often solid starts, accelerating in the second half of the innings and getting up to par and just beyond par, and then being able to defend that with a strong bowling attack. We've seen, as I touched on, in the IPL and the PSL, we've seen slightly newer brands of cricket coming in where you need to sort of score 220, 230 and have a huge amount of power in your batting lineup. It's a little bit, well, it has been a little bit different in the ILT20. And I think that, I would describe that brand of cricket as quite old school with an emphasis on a strong bowling attack.
Mhm. I think this was your first season on ground, but you've been associated with the team since the first season. Just how have you kind of seen DP World ILT20 evolve across the seasons? And if you could also maybe talk to me about how you've seen that role of UAE players and associate nation players, if you've seen that change and how you've kind of seen that change.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably been the main change. Actually, I know that the league was set up as an international league with obviously a high number of overseas players, and as things have gone on, the associate rule has come in as well. But I think that the strength of the UAE contingent is increasingly clear. I mean, for us, obviously, this year, Kazema was a standout player, arguably the standout player, whether UAE overseas or associate from any background, and he was exceptional. But then also even just the depth of those players that I felt that we had at the Vipers was excellent. We had guys like Matiola, Sanjay Patel, and Vidya Aravind, who all played roles across the season. They might have been small roles, but I felt like that was a change compared to in the early seasons. Sometimes it felt like you were hiding UAE players would be the wrong word, but you were sort of a little bit wary of the role that they would play in the game. Whereas now I think for us at the Vipers, they've played a prominent role. And it's not only at our side either. I mean, Ajay Kumar at Abu Dhabi was exceptional. Mohamed Wazim's obviously been a really consistent player. So I think we've seen the UAE players become increasingly prominent. And I actually think the combination of the UAE players, the associate players, and then all of the overseas players does create quite an interesting melting pot of different players, and it's a unique part of the ILT20.
You spoke about Kozema. What why did he have such a good season? What was he doing right according to you?
Well, he was swinging the ball a long way with the new ball in particular. Actually, at the very start of the season, he wasn't our new ball bowler. We bowled him sort of towards the back half of the power play, but it was obvious in some of those early games, even when he was bowling those latter overs, that he was swinging the ball a lot. And so we gave him the new ball, and he obviously did that even more when he had a brand new ball in his hand, and he combined that with accuracy. And I think it was particularly that power play bowling. Conditions in Dubai did help at times, but he was fantastic at exploiting it. Can obviously bring the ball back in and out. And then also he's a really useful batter down the order. I mean, he obviously contributed a really valuable cameo against Abu Dhabi and Sharjah, which won us a tight game early on in the season. And yeah, he's a hell of an all-round cricketer. He'd be getting into ILT20 sides and teams around the world, irrespective of the UAE quota. He's a real talent.
You've been with so many successful franchises. When you look at ILT20, we have signature belts that recognize the individual performers. You have the red, green, blue, white. For the Vipers, you had Sam Khan, you had Max Holden competing for most runs. Khan obviously emerged as the most valuable player. You also had Kuzema competing for to be the highest wicket taker. How important are these standout individual contributions, do you feel, over the course of the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's always it's an interesting question, and a sort of there's always a balance between feeling like you want to have a team where everybody is contributing, um, but having standout performers, I think, gives you an element of stability. I already touched on that stability in terms of roles, but if you've got someone like Curran and Holden actually scoring the volume of runs that they're doing, that really helps build on that philosophy that I talked about of getting to par scores. Like if you're having two of your batters or even one of your batters score 50 on a regular, reliable basis, then you're generally going to be putting decent scores on the board. Even if you find things a little tough at times, you might need a bit of a push towards the end to lift yourself up to that. But it's sort of preventing you getting bowled out very cheaply if you've got two batters who are as reliable as they are, churning out runs day in, day out. So I think that having those big performers allows you to be consistent. And I think the difference then, elevating that consistency into sort of excellence and sustained excellence, is getting contributions from the rest of the team. And I think that's where this year in particular, pretty much every player who was a sort of regular player for us made a defining contribution at some point in the season. Obviously, House with his 100 in the first qualifier. We've already talked about Kazema. David Payne with the ball was regularly making inroads. Noor Ahmed, throughout the side, I felt like we were getting contributions. Dan Lawrence was excellent with bat and ball. So it was the combination of that, yeah, as you said, standout performers, but also everyone in the team chipping in. And it's maybe not a surprise that we ended up as champions when you put it like that.
This year we had the first time we had an auction was this year. How does an auction change the dynamic of leagues in general, do you feel?
Yeah, it's interesting. It adds a complexity to recruitment. Previously in the ILT20, we've obviously just been able to direct sign players, which allows you to do your negotiating maybe under a little less pressure. You're not having to make decisions in the moment. You can think about it. You can talk to the player. You can talk to coaches who know the player. You can debate the pros and the cons of adding player A v player B, and then you can make a considered decision. So I'd say it's easier from a team construction perspective. But then equally, the auction provides opportunities, because if other teams are perhaps a little slow in understanding where there's value, then they might miss a player where you might otherwise have, in a direct signing situation, might not have been able to get that. So I think if you're a well-planned, well-organized unit, and as I said, we've had that consistency from Phil Oliver, Tom Moody, and James Foster, I think we were in a position to be able to do that, to take advantage of opportunities as the auction presented them to us.
You obviously have a very important role as you go into the auction. And the auction of the ILT20 is unique because the squad composition is unique. You need to have UAE players, Kuwait players, Saudi players, and other associate nation players. Um, did that make it more challenging for you? What was your approach to deal with that? And just broadly going into the auction, what was your thought process?
Yeah, it does add another layer of complexity to it, because you've essentially got to meet quota thresholds for certain players, as you said, UAE and the GCC players. We were actually fortunate that before the auction, we'd secured Andreas House as our sort of a starting associate player. We also signed Tom Bruce at the auction, but we knew going into the auction that we'd already got one of, if not the best associate player in house. So that was one thing that gave us a bit of confidence going into the auction. But yeah, the UAE rounds in particular were really important. As we've seen, some of the UAE players fetched very large sums of money. We know that UAE players have got to start, you needed to select 2 in the 11, so it was highly important. But yeah, going in with House and obviously Kazema already meant that it was a little less pressurized. But yeah, it's still important, and you've got to make sure that you've got good local knowledge. And again, that's another thing that the Vipers have got in abundance. We've got a strong pathway program. We've got a number of coaches who work in that pathway program who we actually consulted and had on the auction table and on calls with us in the lead up to the auction itself. So, we took those roles as seriously as any role. And you've seen in leagues like the IPL, the value of domestic scouting. And I think that is coming to the fore in the ILT20 as well, thanks to the UAE rule.
Is it safe to say that now that these associate players come into the ILT20 to the auction, is the likelihood of them coming into the radar of someone like yourself, does that go up exponentially now that they've kind of been vetted or been brought into the ecosystem?
Definitely. I mean, one of the challenges, particularly for an analyst, but for anyone trying to assess a player, is if they're only playing at a certain standard. And by that I mean, for example, for the UAE against other associate nations, it's quite hard to sometimes gauge quite how well that player will do when they make a step up to a bigger league or to a bigger stage. But the ILT20 provides them that platform. And so, for example, I mentioned a couple of them already, Kazema, Ajay Kumar, and Mohamed Wazim have all shown that they can excel at this level. And by all means, they'd be genuine players who could appear in leagues around the world, I think.
Freddie, we're at the 15-minute mark. Could I maybe do 2 more questions if that's all right?
Yep, that's absolutely fine. 2 more's all good.
All right. Just broadly, where do you see this league going? What do we see from the league in the coming years, in your opinion?
Well, I think this sort of international element to it is one that sounds like it's going to continue. We've obviously had the UAE, the 2 UAE players, potentially an expansion of maybe the number of associate players that are involved, and also obviously this year we had the groundbreaking link up with the GCC players, the Gulf nations Kuwait and Saudi. So I expect that to probably continue. And I think it's going to be great for cricket in the region. We've seen, as I've already alluded to, the strides that the UAE players have made in the last 4 years. And I think for the Saudi and Kuwait players, it might not happen quite yet. It might take a little bit longer, but I think we'll see a similar effect happening. It can only be a good thing. for cricketers from those countries to be exposed to high-level, elite international standard cricket. And I expect it to lift cricket up in that region. So I think that's one thing that will continue. I think the other thing that is interesting to know is obviously the impact player is a rule that's in the ILT20. We're seeing that come into force in a number of other leagues as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops and whether any new innovations come in across the coming years.
Okay. My last question, it's a bit more of a generic one, but because you've been with the Englishman white ball team, you've been with the Invincibles, you've been with RCB, what defines a winning combination? Is there a is there a specific concoction that works?
Honestly, I don't think there is a specific thing that works. I think you have to be when building a team and when coming up with tactics and strategies, there has to be an element of flexibility according to different conditions. I already touched on the fact that the IPL is very different to the ILT20, and in turn, for example, that's very different to the 100, which is literally a completely different format. So I think the key is understanding the differences between those leagues, and some of the important principles that you might stand by might subtly change from league to league, competition to competition, and when different conditions dictate. That said, as an analyst and as the coaches that I work with, we'll have some key philosophies that we like to stick to, but it's about understanding where you slightly dial up one thing and slightly dial down another. And the other thing as well that I don't think can be overstated or understated. Sorry, the other thing that I don't think can be overstated is the value of a clear, strong environment whereby players are clear on their roles. I talked about that at the top of this conversation about providing players with confidence and clarity about what it is that we're asking of them. That's one thing that for me that's really stood out is understanding that a player wants to know what his role is in the team, and it might change day to day, but if he's clear on what it is that we expect of him going into a game, then that can only be a good thing. So I think role clarity is absolutely massive.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Freddie. That's what
That's
I
okay.
think.
No worries.